Hey everyone, welcome back. This is lesson 8.5, solving rational equations and inequalities, part 1. Your objective for today, you're going to be able to solve rational equations and inequalities. Your vocabulary for today is rational equation, extraneous solution, and rational inequality. A rational equation is an equation that contains one or more rational expressions. One example is the distance equation. We know the distance formula is distance equals rate times time. If I wanted to solve for time, I could divide both sides by r, and I would have time equals distance over the rate. All right, this is an example of a rational equation. The time t in hours that it takes to travel d miles can be determined by using the equation t equals d over r, where r is the average rate of speed. This equation is a rational equation. To solve a rational equation, start by multiplying each term of the equation by the least common denominator of all the expressions in the equation. This step eliminates the denominators of the rational expression and results in an equation that you can solve by using algebra. Makes your life much easier. So let's look at an example. The problem says to solve this equation, and the first thing I want to do is find the least common denominator, and that's an easy one on this one. It's just x. So my least common denominator is x, so I'm going to multiply every term by x, okay? And notice that this one middle term, the x's are going to cancel out because when I multiply them, I no longer have my x in the denominator. So I'll have x squared minus 18 equals 3x. All right, and I want you to notice that x can't equal 0 because if x is 0, then my whole equation would be undefined. All right, so once I have x squared minus 18 equals 3x, I want to go ahead and set it into standard forms, and I'm going to just do that by subtracting 3x on both sides, and that will let me equal it to 0. All right, so now I have x squared minus 3x minus 18. And the next thing I want to do is go ahead and factor that out. So I'm going to find two numbers that multiply together to get negative 18, add together to get negative 3. And I know that that is going to be 6 times 3. 6 times 3, but I'm going to put my negative on this side. And so now the factored form is going to be x minus 6 times x plus 3 equals 0. So the next thing I have to do is just apply my zero product property, and I can note that x minus 6 is equal to 0 or x plus 3 is equal to 0. So then I just have to solve for x. So x is either going to equal 6 or x will equal negative 3. The great thing about math is we can always check to find out if we did the problem correctly. So all we have to do is substitute in. The first side we can substitute 6 in, and we see that when we do, we get 3 equals 3, so we know that that one is correct. The second side we can also go ahead and multiply in and substitute in your negative 3. And when we do that, we also note that it's 3 equals 3, so we did the problem correctly. All right, so turn your video off and try this one on your own. All right, once again, we have to, first thing we want to do is find a common denominator, and that's pretty easy to see. It's going to be 3x. So we're going to multiply each side by 3x. And when we do, let's look at what's going to happen. My 3's are going to cancel out, and my x here will cancel out. So that's going to leave me with 10x equals 12 plus 6x. All right, so then when I combine all my terms, if I subtract my negative 6x from both sides, that leaves me with 4x equals 12. So I'm going to combine up my like terms and get 4x equals 12. Now, all I have to do is divide both sides by 4, and I end up with solving for x, which is x equals 3. Here's another one for you to try on your own. Turn the video off and try it again. Okay, on this one, you should have noticed again that the least common denominator is x times 4, or 4x. So what we want to do is go ahead and multiply every term by 4x. All right, and when we multiply every term by 4x, this x cancels out, my 4 cancels out, and my 4 cancels out, leaving me with 24 plus 5x equals 7x, and that's a negative 7x. All right, so there it is right there. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and we're going to combine our like terms. We end up with 24 equals negative 12x. Solve for x next, and we end up with x equals negative 2. And of course, you can go back and check that on your own. All right, one more problem to try on your own. Turn your video off and give it one more try. Okay, once again, our common denominator is just going to be x, so we're going to multiply everything, each term, by x. And when we multiply each term by x, it looks like this, and our x crosses out, getting rid of our denominator. So we end up with an equation that says x squared equals 6 minus x. And next, all we have to do is solve for x. It's a little more challenging this time, because we're going to subtract 6 from both sides and add an x to both sides, leaving us with x squared plus x minus 6. Now we probably should go ahead and factor that out. Two numbers that multiply together to get negative 6, add together to get 1. Well, that's easy. It's 3 times negative 2. So when we factor that out, we get x minus 2 times x plus 3 equals 0. Once we've done that, we can just go ahead and apply the zero product and then solve for x. And we see that x equals 2 or x equals negative 3. An extraneous solution is a solution of an equation derived from an original equation that is not a solution of the original equation. When you solve a rational equation, it is possible to get extraneous solutions. These values should be eliminated from the solution set. Always check your solutions by substituting them into the original equation. So let's try an example and see if we can find an extraneous solution. When we want to solve this one, the first thing we look for is do we have a common denominator? And yes, it's x minus 2. So what we want to do is multiply both sides by x minus 2, thereby getting rid of our denominator. So when we multiply them through, our x minus 2 cancels out on both sides, leaving me with just 5x equals 3x plus 4. Okay, so once we do that, we can then solve for x, and so by subtracting 2x on both sides and then dividing through, we get x equals 2. So let's talk about this for a minute. Notice that when we have our denominator down here, if x equals 2, our equation is going to be undefined, or our term is undefined. And so if our answer is equal to 2, then our equation is undefined, and so since that's the only answer, it is extraneous because it makes the denominators of the original equation equal to 0. Therefore, the equation has no solution. All right, and you can always check on this to make sure. So when you go back in and put 2 into each of them, you see that it ends up being 10 over 0, and with division by 0 is known as being undefined. All right, here's another example. Again, the first thing we want to do is take a look at and see if we can find what a common denominator is, the least common denominator. And I see that it's going to be 2 times x minus 8. So what I want to do is go through and multiply each term times 2 times x minus 8. So here's what that's going to look like. Okay, take a look at that. Now, once I've done that, multiplied each term by the least common denominator, I'm going to go ahead and divide out the common denominator, so I'm going to factor them out. So I notice I have an x minus 8 here and an x minus 8 here. The 2's cancel out, and here the x minus 8 cancels out. So now what I need to do once I've canceled everything out is I'm going to go ahead and simplify. But one thing I need to make special note of is that x cannot equal positive 8, because down here or over here, x minus 8, if x minus 8 is going to equal 0, that means x equals 8. So when x equals 8, our equation is undefined. So let's go ahead and multiply this through and get all of our like terms together. We do that by distributing my 2 and then distributing my x. All right, and we end up with 4x minus 10x plus x squared minus 8x equals 22. Again, getting it into standard form, we're going to see that it's actually x squared. 4x minus 8x is minus 4x minus 10 equals 22. So let's go ahead and subtract our 22 from both sides. So we actually end up with 32, minus 32. So x squared minus 4x minus 32. I'm going to finish this on the next slide because I've run out of room here. All right, so there we have x squared minus 4x minus 32 equals 0, and it's written in its standard form. So next we want to just go ahead and factor that. So again, remember, two numbers that multiply together to get negative 32, add together to get negative 4, are going to be negative 8 times positive 4. So here we have it factored out. X minus 8 times x plus 4 equals 0. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and solve. Use our zero product rule and then solve for x. So we know x is going to either equal 8 or x will equal negative 4. Now remember, back in our original problem, we said that x cannot equal 8. Otherwise, our entire equation will be undefined. So that tells us that the solution x equals 8 is extraneous, and I misspelled that. It makes the denominator of the original equation equal to 0. So the only solution is x equals negative 4. And the great thing about math is we can always go back and check. So what we could do at first is go ahead and rewrite our equation. Here was our original equation. If we set it equal to 0 just by subtracting this piece onto the other side, we could just put it into the graphing calculator. So take this whole left side and write it into your y1. Okay, and then what we're looking for is when will it equal 0. So you can look at the graph and see that it equals 0 at negative 4. You could also look at the table by clicking second table in that same place. All right, the graph intersects the x-axis only when x equals negative 4. Therefore, x equals negative 4 is the only solution. All right, why don't you turn your video off one more time and try this one on your own. Okay, so first thing we need to do is find our least common denominator. And before we can do that, we need to go ahead and factor this out. So x squared minus 16, notice, is the difference of two perfect squares. So my least common denominator is going to be x plus 4 times x minus 4. So we want to multiply that by both sides. So once I've done that, you can see, and once I have multiplied it by both sides and we cancel everything out, we can divide things out. So I have an x minus 4 and an x minus 4, x plus 4, and x plus 4. And then on the other side, we just cross those out. And now we're going to simplify. So I end up with just 16 on one side and 2 times x plus 4 on the other, which would be 2x plus 8. Next thing, I just want to solve for x. It's pretty simple. X equals 4. All right, the solution is x equals 4 is an extraneous because it makes the denominator of the original equation equal to 0. Notice 4 squared is 16 and 16 minus 16 is 0. So since that was our only answer, the equation has no solution in the end because that only solution that's there would make it undefined, so that doesn't count as a solution. Okay, try this one on your own. Turn your video off and give it a try. All right, so the first thing you need to do is make sure you find the least common denominator, and we can see that it's going to be x minus 1 times 6. So there it is, and we want to multiply each of our terms by our least common denominator. So when I do that, I can go ahead and divide out the common factors. So let's see what they are. I see x minus 1 and an x minus 1. I see an x minus 1 and x minus 1 again, so I'm going to go ahead and divide those out. And then my 6's can get divided out. And when I do that, then I can just simplify everything up, multiplying it all out. But I need to notice that x cannot equal positive 1, because when x is positive 1, it makes it 0, and that's an undefined equation. So let's go ahead and simplify it, and there that is for you. And then I'm going to use the distributive property and go ahead and work it on out. You can work this out on your own if you want. Now I need to get it in standard form, so I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. Minus 6, and get all my like terms together, so I have 5x, and I have an x squared plus 5x minus 6. So now I'm just going to say two numbers that multiply together to get negative 6, add together to get 5, is going to be 6 and negative 1. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. All right, so once again, I've written it in standard form, and then go ahead and factor that out. X plus 6 times x minus 1. And I'm going to use the zero product property rule and solve for x. And so now I know that x is equal to negative 1 or x equals 1. Now remember, back at the very beginning, we took a look at it and said x can't equal 1. Otherwise, our entire equation will be undefined. So the solution x equals 1 is extraneous because it makes the denominator of the original equation equal to 0. The only solution is x equals negative 6. And that is the end of our lesson for solving rational equations and inequalities part 1. Be sure and stay tuned for part 2. Have a great day. Take a break. See you in a little bit. Bye.